Hi there, welcome to the Lad Mix Farm channel. It's Arthur here. And in today's episode, I would like to share with you the big mistakes I regret making in my goat farming business. The first and foremost, really. By the way, first of all, these are mistakes I had to endure, I had to go through as a starter. And the big mistake number one, was to identify goats who were still young. I went out there to procure goats. I bought 40 goats in total. 20 were of age, ready to breed, but the other 20 I decided to look for the younger ones because I wanted to accumulate more, to have a total of 40 goats, and the money wasn't quite enough. So it meant looking after these 20 additional goats that were still young for around 8 months before they could be of age to start breeding. Now, that was quite expensive on my side because that means I endured 8 months of paying the workers, of treating, before they can even start breeding. And I felt a big pinch in my limited resources that I had at that time. And so it's very important that as one really starts this goat farming business, always identify the mother flock that is of age, that is going to really conceive. Immediately you bring them, like let's say after a month or so, or maybe those that come when they are already heavy. So that was my greatest mistakes I made as I started. Now, because as I tried to look for farms around to be able to buy the mother flock, there were limited farms in this locality where I could be able to identify the mother flock. So I had no option but to go to a different sub-region with a completely different climatic condition as we have here in the northern part of Uganda. And so when I brought in these goats, they had to first of all get acclimatized to the climate here and the grasses and so forth. So in so doing, they really had different ailments. Too much flu, that was a big problem, pneumonia, and so forth. And yet these are really grown goats. Some of them were ready to be mothers, others really, I told you, they were a bit grown but with a few months before they could be able to conceive. And so I had to incur a lot of money in medication. And also I think it brought in some bit of stress in the animals as they tried to get used, and it took them actually longer before they could start showing signs of being on heat. So to get goats from a different sub-region, much as I brought them during the onset of the dry season, and also that one impeded the pace at which we really wanted to move in terms of starting the breeding process. So it became quite a challenge for me. The third one, I relied heavily in identifying these goats from the breeders where I went to buy these goats from. So when I reached there, of course, because they are superior and more senior in the game, I listened a lot to them. So I noticed that much as I got goats from them, they weren't the healthy goats that I'd expected. And it looks like the breeder also identified some goats from elsewhere that he mixed in his, but then selected them in my presence as the goats I should start with. But remember, since I had already failed to identify them within the sub-region where I was going to start the goat farming business, I had no option but to go on with that, with the choices he had made for me. And when I brought them here, I noticed several signs that showed me that some of the goats were not that healthy, were not necessarily from his breeding stock, and therefore I incurred losses. Actually, some goats died. I think I lost up to around 5 or 6 goats because of the different ailments. Some of them came with some chronic illnesses that I could not ably treat after even trying several times. So that one was another big mistake, relying on the breeder like they know it all, instead of also bringing in my own instincts and trying to use that as I try to identify. Now, the other challenge I got is, remember, I didn't have enough money, so I just put a shed, a housing, put poles and make a shade and be able to shelter them from the rains. But the other challenge, much as there were bigger goats and mature, there were a lot of signs of coldness around, and so too much wind, too much coldness in the night, and I realized that it was affecting these animals. Remember, they were trying to get used to the environment. Now again, they are sleeping in an open space much as they are roofed. The wind would come in strongly, blowing and with very cold, and that also affected the health. Sometimes you'd wake up in the morning and you see the hairs, you know, all standing like that as a sign of ill health in the animal. So that's another major challenge that I faced, but which is something I should have actually addressed. But because I didn't have enough resources, I endured with that. It was too cold for the animals that were still getting used to the area. And then also the big number. 40 goats as a starter when I didn't have enough money was also a big challenge. Why? Because when they started getting ill, when I needed to deworm all the 40 goats. Most of them were falling ill, meaning I would call in a vet. A vet would be expensive. Remember, they come from far. Like from where I am, they come like from a distance of 50, 60 kilometers. And that is a cost. He'll tell you to provide fuel. When he comes, he charges you per goat, and which was quite costly. So big numbers without having enough savings was quite a big problem for me. Now, when I reached the point of breeding them or identifying a boer buck, I went and identified a pure buck that I introduced into the flock. Now, remember, when you go to these breeding farms, they normally have a collection of good bucks. But because they don't want inbreeding in their farms, there is a tendency of isolating these bucks, and you find them grazing alone. You find like 100 bucks, very good, but grazing alone. They are not mixed with the other mother flock or the other herd. And that is the group that is going to be sold off to other aspiring farmers. So I identified this buck and brought it. Very good genes. But remember, from the time it was born and it was almost 2 years, it had not exercised the mating and so forth. So when I introduced it to 40 mothers, it took time to adopt, because remember, I also got it from another sub-region. And then after taking long, it was not very active. So in the whole season, only 8 goats were able to conceive in a period of 3 months. That was a lot of pain on my side, because I had expected that maybe it will come and try to mount all of them in 3 months, because I left it with the mother flock for 3 months. Remember, I tried to also exercise the synchronization process where I want all the mothers to conceive at once and give birth once. There it is easier to manage the animals. So after 3 months, it had only mated with 8 females. And that was a big loss. It meant that all the other 32 could not. It was generally weak and trying to catch up. Remember, it's not used to mating for the 2 years. So I felt it was a big challenge for me, and I didn't have money to buy a second buck. So I had to isolate this buck until the other goats started giving birth, and then introduced it again. But this time, of course, I made sure that I identified some more money to introduce the second buck. But surprisingly, when I introduced the second buck, this other one had now gotten the vigor and was very active, and actually tended to even be more active than the second buck, which was equally active. So these are some of the challenges that I've been able to go through, and these are the big mistakes I really regret making, which I feel I should be able to share with you, the aspiring farmers and my colleagues and friends, to be able to learn from and be able to avoid as we move along. Please feel free to send in your comments and suggestions in case you have any. And if you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. We'll be very happy to be with you as we journey along. Thank you so much.